Over the weekend, President Biden and Kevin McCarthy announced a tentative agreement to raise the debt ceiling until January 2025, potentially avoiding a domestic and international economic catastrophe. Intrigued? Then click that like and subscribe and enjoy the video. Man, it seems every time I'm out of town, all the big exciting political developments happen, and I'm trying not to be bitter. But today's video is about the debt ceiling. It'll probably be the first of many because there's so much to unpack over the past couple of days pertaining to this topic. Now, chief among them is the fact that the president and Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, have announced a tentative, emphasis on tentative, agreement to raise the debt ceiling until January 1st, 2025, potentially avoiding an economic default, which would just wreck the global economy, not only now, but for at least another year until after the 2024 presidential election. So we're kicking the can down the road again. More on that later. Now, I emphasize that this is a tentative agreement because it still has to pass Congress. It has to pass the House of Representatives, has to pass the Senate, and then it has to make its way to President Biden's desk for his signature. And it really needs to do it in like the next 3 days because it's May 29th, and according to the Treasury Department, the X date, which is when the Treasury officially runs out of money to pay America's bills, which would trigger the default, is supposedly on June 1st, potentially June 5th, because it's not an exact science. The Treasury Department gets millions of bills each and every day, so it's not like one or two, right? It's not like a household budget where you can be very precise with terms, but the ballpark is June 1st or June 5th. We really want to avoid that, so Congress has to get after it right now. So we're going to look at the deal that the president made with Speaker McCarthy, but before we do, I want to go back to April 20th, because that was when the Republican Party in the House of Representatives, under Kevin McCarthy, passed the Limit, Save, Grow Act of 2023. That was supposedly, according to McCarthy, their opening round, their opening salvo in a negotiation with Democrats and the president. Now, according to the hardliners in the Republican Party, the Freedom Caucus, people like Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert, etc., this was not the opening salvo. This was the first and final offer that they would vote for. They demanded that Democrats and the president agree to all the terms in this piece of legislation. So we got to go back and look at what they asked for initially and then see what they may very well get if Congress passes the deal between McCarthy and Biden. So this is a CNN breakdown. The proposal, this is again the Limit, Save, Grow Act of 2023. This is the initial offer made by Republicans or the initial demands a month ago. This is not the debt ceiling deal made by Biden and McCarthy. That comes later. So the initial proposal would have returned federal funding for agencies to 2022 levels and aiming to limit the growth in spending to 1% per year. Pentagon budget would not be touched because, of course, Republicans will never touch defense spending, right? Even though they say they want to be fiscally conservative, fiscally responsible, they will not touch defense spending, even though the Pentagon spends more than the next 15 countries combined on defense, which includes China and Russia. Now, if you were really aiming for fiscal conservatism and you really wanted to tighten your belt, perhaps we could cut defense spending responsibly. Perhaps we don't need to spend more than the next 15 countries combined to maintain American military supremacy. Just a thought. Of course, the package did not also list any cuts, right? It just proposed cuts across the board because the last thing Republicans wanted was to make like an itemized list of demands that the media and the public could scrutinize and nitpick and point holes in, or poke holes in. Another major element was they wanted to block President Biden's student forgiveness program, which promised relief up to $20,000 per borrower for middle and lower income borrowers. Now, right now, that program is being litigated or reviewed by the Supreme Court, and there's a 6-3 regressive conservative supermajority in the court, so they may succeed where Republicans failed and kill this thing entirely. But Republicans wanted President Biden to revoke it, didn't want to leave it up to the Supreme Court. They wanted basically President Biden to wave the white flag and just agree to kill the program before they raised the debt ceiling. As part of the Inflation Reduction Act last year, President Biden announced $80 billion of additional IRS spending to target like the high-income, the multimillionaires and the multi-billionaires who are using their wealth and connections and exploitation of tax loopholes to avoid paying taxes. Increased IRS funding would allow the IRS to go after these prime targets and claw back tax revenue that the federal government is entitled to, which would also help reduce the deficit and the debt. McCarthy and Republicans wanted to get all $80 billion of those dollars back. They wanted to kill that additional IRS funding in its entirety. They also wanted to add work requirements for non-discretionary, what they call entitlement programs. So like SNAP, food assistance, things like that. Basically, they wanted to put additional burdens on people who needed these benefits, which of course would reduce participation in those programs, make it more difficult to maintain those programs. And most people are criticizing this. This is like kicking people while they're down, hurting the lowest earners among us, people who need these benefits the most. There's no reason when the government can afford all these things, and this is such a paltry element of the federal budget. Like, this is a sliver of the federal budget. There's no reason to make this your priority. It's just cruel. And then, of course, they wanted to repeal all the green energy cuts that President Biden included in the IRA. So everything that was trying to roll out climate change reforms and green energy, tax incentives, things like that, McCarthy wanted all that back. So that's in a nutshell. Okay, what did they get? Well, according to the deal made by McCarthy and President Biden, it would raise the debt ceiling until January 1st, 2025, which means that this fight wouldn't happen until after the next presidential election. So we're kicking the can down the road. And you can bet your butt that if President Biden wins re-election in November 2024, Republicans will do this all over again. They will absolutely do everything in their power, if they're in a position to hold the debt ceiling hostage to extort the president again. Non-defense discretionary spending, and this is in terms of what they got from the president now. Non-defense discretionary spending would be roughly flat at current year levels. Okay, so there wouldn't be an increase in entitlement programs, things like that. There would be increased defense spending, as a matter of fact. So it wouldn't just not touch the Pentagon; it would actually boost total defense spending to $886 billion, in line with actually President Biden's initial 2024 proposal. It's about a 3% increase from the $858 billion allocated in the current budget for the Pentagon. Now, in terms of the IRS, McCarthy took a big L here. He wanted all $80 billion back, but he didn't get anywhere close to it. So according to the deal, again, this tentative deal, the new legislation and subsequent appropriations would shift $10 billion in each of the calendar years, 2024 and 2025, in funding away from the IRS. So if you look at it that way, that's $20 billion of the $80 billion. That $10 billion in 2024 and $10 billion in 2025 would be shifted away from the IRS into, I think it was non-defense discretionary funding, if I remember correctly. But according to the White House, they intend to claw this money back. Administration officials believe the IRS can make do in the near term since it was funded over a 10-year period. So they have plenty of money. It's $60 billion still. And if we get Democrats get congressional majorities back in the next few elections, we can undo this. Biden and McCarthy agreed to claw back much of the unused COVID relief funds as part of the budget deal. The estimated amount of unused funds is between $50 billion and $70 billion. Some funds, according to the White House, would be retained, including items related to vaccine funding, housing assistance, and support for Native Americans. Now, there are some work requirements that McCarthy was able to squeeze in here. No changes were made to Medicaid in the deal, but the agreement would impose new work requirements on some low-income people who receive food assistance under the SNAP program up to age 54 instead of up to age 50. Student loans, McCarthy took another L. This new bill would not touch President Biden's student loan program. It would remain untouched. Now, again, the Supreme Court may kill it entirely anyway, right? But in terms of the concessions that McCarthy was able to get from Biden, the student loan program is untouched. Energy permitting is another one. So both the president and McCarthy agreed to make new rules to make it easier for energy projects, including fossil fuel energies, unfortunately, but also green energy projects, much easier to gain permit approval. Okay. I'll also point out that when it comes to the green energy credits, so like all the climate provisions in President Biden's IRA program, McCarthy didn't get any of them. He wanted all of them to be revoked. He got none of them revoked. So now the question becomes, who won? Well, that's probably a topic for a different video because we could go on that for a while. But as you can see, McCarthy did get some concessions from the president, but on major elements, especially when he demanded all or nothing, like we want all of the student loan forgiveness program to be killed. We want all of the green energy credits to be repealed. All. We want all of the IRS funding revoked. None of that happened. So you can probably draw your own conclusions here. I will point out that, again, this is a tentative agreement. That has to be emphasized above all else. It's entirely possible that Republican members of the Freedom Caucus, the far-right Trump-supporting elements of the Freedom Caucus, who are upset that McCarthy didn't get more out of Biden, they may not vote against it or vote for this. They may vote against it. On the flip side, you have progressives in the House and the Senate who may very well not support this agreement either. They may be understandably frustrated that the president didn't go bolder or like invoking the 14th Amendment or minting the $1 trillion coin, and that even the few concessions he made was too much. It was giving into a hostage taker. And again, that'll be a source for or topic for a different video, I think, but just wanted to go over it. There's clearly a stark contrast compared to what Republicans demanded Biden give them initially and what they got in the end. So in the meantime, draw your own conclusions. We will be uncovering the rest of the debt ceiling situation in subsequent videos.